Welcome to Resonance, podcast by Quetzal y Andrade. Talking about bass, effects, and life things. And while we're on the subject, at least during this time of season, time of the year, during this season, right? It's Thanksgiving week, and I'm definitely thankful for a lot of things, grateful for a lot of things. Yes, including music, just the fact that I'm alive and breathing, but also the connections that I've built along the way, the human connections, right? Family, friends. And last night was a great hang with some bandmates from Vibe Check. We had a Friendsgiving. Like 99% of the members were able to show up. We unfortunately had one member missing, but it's been a tradition that we've been having for the last 3 years. And it's one of those things where you don't realize it's a tradition until it's like, oh, we are doing this, right? There's almost like a moment of silence where you're like, okay, why hasn't anybody brought this up? Why haven't we started talking about what date we're going to get together? Who's bringing what, right? And it was one of those things where a couple of us were in cahoots and started to text each other, and it's like, yeah, we're definitely doing. It's an annual thing. It's an annual expectation. It is a tradition, at least with this one particular band. Even though I hold a lot of musicians and friends close to me, but the the interesting thing is that there's been a lot going on this year, personally, right, with my music endeavors, with the family, but also with one of our bandmates, our actual lead singer, Ralph Edwards III, who has this season made The Voice, right, season 28. And so it's a really cool thing that he's made it this far in the show, and he's done very well. And to be honest, I'm grateful for the connection and the relationship, the friendship that has grown between him and I over the course of the last 3.5 years. It's kind of crazy how one decision can potentially ruin some great experiences on the rise, right? I actually got hit up by a friend, and I reminded everyone of this fact last night too when we went around the table, just mentioning something that we were thankful or grateful for. And 3.5 years ago, I had a friend who was also in attendance last night ask me if I could come through at a last minute gig just to fill in the next night. And I was like, It was one of those not immediate yeses, just because it kind of like, threw me off guard for a moment. Not because I wouldn't have said yes. It was more like, wait, oh, shoot, that's right. It was at an establishment where we had cut ties, right, with my personal band having had some issue with what was going on, how things were handled previously, and so we decided to not try to continue anything further with that establishment. However, my friend went ahead and asked me if I would play there with a new group, right, including Ralph Edwards III, and it was such a cool thing where I immediately said yes because, first of all, it was my friend that was asking me if I could come through. Secondly, I had heard, oh, this guy's a really good singer. It's going to be one of those things where the curiosity definitely sparked up, and I was itching to play, right? Being a musician, where it's hard for us to say no to a lot of gigs, right? So it was one of those things where I could have easily said, you know what, the history or the past is a thing to hold myself accountable for. No, I'm gonna be prideful. I'm gonna go ahead and say, I'll pass this gig. I don't need to be there. I for whatever ego, I could have definitely have said no. But I'm grateful. I am grateful that I thought about the music and the people first that I would be sharing the stage with. The fact that um, I care more about that than some sort of other ego that might potentially be in the room, or some other potential musician, right, that might be on stage that maybe isn't on the same page as I am. Maybe we're not the best of friends, right? But if the music is first, it's amazing what can be accomplished. So to kind of wrap it up, I ended up going to the gig, and I heard Ralph sing, and I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's gonna sing like this the whole night. I mean, range for days, energy, volume, um, character, right? And just I was blown away with the first song or two, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's two more sets after this. I was thoroughly impressed and stoked that I was right alongside him on this gig. And what ended up happening was there was two more gigs that weekend. He's like, "Can you make these next two?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you know." And we did another three gigs then a week after, and we pretty much just hit the ground running together. And I'm grateful for the 3.5 years where almost every weekend we are gigging, right? We're doing shows and having a great time, and uh, we've built a strong friendship. We've built some um, chemistry on stage with everyone where we sound like us. We're a cover band, but we definitely sound like us. And so I'm grateful for that piece and that very recent gathering that we had. Definitely a few more things in order this week with other friends and family members, right, over the course of the weekend. But speaking of gratitude and being thankful, there's definitely some appreciation for some of the gear that has come along the way, right? That um, maybe 20 years ago I wouldn't have thought, man, I'm gonna have a pedal board system or a pair of boards that encompass this or that, and let alone being able to fathom that original music was going to be something that I was all about, right? Really into recording original music and instrumental music at that. Um, on the bass for one, right? At least the first six albums. So I'm just very happy for the opportunity and the equipment that I've been able to acquire over time to uh, create soundscapes and hopefully a sound that sounds like me. Hopefully material that um, kind of provides this idea that this is what Q sounds like. This is what Quetzada sounds like. And I've had some friends say that I have a sound, and I'm trying to acknowledge that, accept that, believe that, um, and but also be like, what is that? Like, if you were to ask me, well, what's your sound? I think that would be a very tough question to answer. So I'm not going to go ahead and answer that right here, right now, or attempt to formulate something right here, right now. But what I want to say is that along the way with gear and time, things come up out of necessity. Things come around um, out of just coincidence, or perhaps just out of curiosity. But let's face it, some of the gear we've had over the years, and I'm trying to include everybody, was deliberate. Like, oh man, I really looked into this product, and I got it, and I'm glad I did. I'm grateful for having done the homework, right? And now it's paid dividends. I use it, blah blah blah. And let's face it, there's some gear where we acquire it, we purchase it because it's a little bit spontaneous, right? It's the new trending thing, or it just caught our eye at some point in time, and we're like, hey, I have the money, or maybe I don't. Hey, charge it. Go ahead and just, I need this. I'm taking it home. Send it to my doorstep, whatever the case is. And I want to just be grateful for the instruments that I've had along the way, whether they were expensive or more mainstream. Obviously, I have played some boutique basses over the course of the last 15 years, and the reality is I played a bunch of Ibanez basses early on in my career, playing professionally, and I'm grateful for those instruments. Right? They were one of those things where you saw several people use them, but hey, they worked for me. I could afford those at the time, and grateful for the mishaps, right, of some gear just not working because then that prompted me to explore something different, something new, and maybe it forced me to play a little differently once I acquired that new instrument. I was in college and I ended up doing some gig somewhere, and it was around the winter time, and I ended up putting my bass in the back of my truck that had a camper shell, mind you, and I ended up thinking, all right, I'm gonna pull this thing out. I'm gonna go ahead and practice when I get home. It was after a gig, thankfully. Luckily, it wasn't to a gig, but I pulled it out, and yes, it had rained the night before or something. And I pulled out my bass. I get inside the house, and I'm like, my case is wet. And so I get out the bass and I plug it in, and it doesn't work. So I didn't know much about, I still don't know much about electronics, but for whatever reason, that killed the battery. Something happened with the jack or whatever. I don't even remember if I tried swapping out a battery to go ahead and make sure that it wasn't just a battery issue. But either way, I took it out and nothing worked. And maybe I did try a new battery because I was convinced that the water damage had done its thing and this bass was no longer usable. It was a Ibanez 5-string BTB, and I loved that bass for many years. But I was like, okay, this thing's toast. This thing's done. So I ended up telling somebody in college about it, saying, hey, I'm going to get rid of this bass because it doesn't work. But, if you know anybody that knows how to fix them or is curious about, buying it anyway, right, and getting it, tuned up, then, by all means, spread the word. And he's like, I'll buy it off you. I was like, are you serious? I was like, yeah. He goes, like, I'll mess with it. I'll try to fix it. I'm like, okay. So I don't remember what I sold it for, but to me, it was like, all right, it's dead. It's done. Get rid of it. And when I found out about this bass being dead, right, trying to play it, it was like a Saturday morning when I tried messing with it. I had a gig Friday night or something. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I have no bass, right? This is my one axe. What am I going to do? So what do? You go to Guitar Center. And at the time, that was just, the thing to do. Wasn't going to explore any sort of online shopping options because that wasn't really trending or available then, as far as I can remember. And so I ended up going to Guitar Center and I picked up a Schecter 5-string Elite bass. And it was one of those things where it just felt good. It sounded great in the room. And how many of you have experienced that, right? Like you pick something up and you're like, oh, I need this. Just because it sounds great in that small room, everything's booming, at a level that just makes you sound like awesome, right? So anyway, I ended up buying this bass for two reasons. One of the local bass players that I look up to had a Schecter 5-string Elite bass, and then another person as well, bass player wise, also had one. And so it was one of those things where it was just like, well, some people have them, so it must hold up, right? It's not going to just die on me on the first gig type of thing. Like it seems like people retain these, even though I was like sold on Ibanez basses for a very long time. So I ended up getting the bass, and I had every desire initially that day to return it eventually, just to get through the weekend, just to get through the gigs, and then try to get my other bass fixed up. But everybody, had to, pat me on the back about the new bass and, oh, it looks great. You can't return this. It sounds great. You look great with it. And, it just, all that affirmation stuck. And I definitely liked the bass. It was definitely a great fit, which I ended up playing for several years after that. And so, some of those things, right, where you learn to take care of your gear a little more, maybe not trust a camper shell, whether or not water damage is really a thing that can affect an instrument. How much are you willing to invest in keeping an instrument before you move on to the next? And then just being grateful for, again, these instruments that were not boutique, and they got me several gigs, right? They were workhorses. And now that I do have some boutique basses, it's one of those things where I've told people, hey, I never want to come off as somebody that isn't grateful for what they have, or to seem entitled and that the only way I can do what I do is with a boutique bass, with something that's over X amount of dollars. Like, no, 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 no. If things were tough, if we were in a pinch, I'd like to think that I would sell this stuff immediately and play with bare bones, whatever. Just a 4-string P bass if need be, and an amp, right? No bass pedal, no effects. Um, yeah, I want to stay grounded, in that way, and I want to keep telling people that, so that if the time happens, if the time comes, right, and it happens where I need to sell um, everything, I want to be grateful for the music and not be somebody that's a slave to all the gear, right? I don't want to be um, I don't want to be helpless without all the bells and whistles, right? I still want to be able to sound like me. I still want to be able to make music and have a great time, which brings me to another point of being grateful, um, having gratitude, because there's times where we can lose sight of what's important, right? I remember a couple of years ago, I ended up doing some gig in a venue. I won't even say what kind of venue it is, but um, it was one of those places where it was acoustically terrible. Everything was booming. It wasn't even a large place, but definitely very boomy. And no matter what we did as a band, it was going to sound pretty bad in there, right? The sound was just slapping off the walls, concrete floor. Even with bodies in the room, it wasn't going to sound great. So anyway, it ended up being one of those things where I was very annoyed with the sound. And not that I was vocal about anything like, oh, this needs to be adjusted or this needs to be fixed, and starting to point fingers or anything like that. I did none of that. But I was definitely at a loss for like enthusiasm. I was just like, this is rough. And then I'm thinking, I got 2 more sets after this, right? We're a few songs in, and I flipped the switch, and I told myself, you know what? You are where you need to be, and you're here because of the music, and you need to be grateful for the music and the opportunity to play music, because there's people that wish they could, and they don't have those opportunities, or they're not at that level yet. And so I flipped the switch, and I told myself, I'm gonna make the most of this night. This is not gonna be a wasted night. And so yeah, it probably still sounded, mid the rest of the night. It still sounded probably chaotic and overly boomy and whatnot, but I had a great time. I started playing differently. My attitude changed. I got into the music. I started moving a little more, and it was a blast. There wasn't a whole lot of people, and I felt like this was a gig that I was probably going to remember for years to come. And again, this is a couple of years later. I do remember that gig, and the switch that I flipped to be grateful and change my attitude, change the way I played my instrument, because it could all be gone, right, from one moment to the next. Another story of gratitude comes with the end of 2017 going to 2018, where I caught valley fever, and I was hospitalized for 9 days. And my son was like a year and a half, and again, only son. And I thought this was it. I thought this was the end. Lost 30 pounds. I've always been a stick, always been, crazy skinny, but 30 pounds from somewhere, and, coughing blood, couldn't break the fevers. I was really thinking this was it. This was the end. And I was trying to mentally and spiritually be prepared for whatever, right? Recovery or not, or, whatever was in God's plan. And I ended up, thankfully, pulling through, breaking the fever. I was eventually discharged, went home, and was on medication for like another year and a half. And grateful to be able to be walking, have my memory, and again, my family, which has grown, right? 2 more kids after that, and it was extremely grateful, right? But it was one of those things where coming back into teaching, into working, right, and trying to come back to live music, playing the bass and being present enough and healthy enough mentally strong enough to go ahead and do those gigs, right? I remember having to sit and play for several gigs before I could stand again, with enough strength and let alone, right, start two-stepping and vibing with everyone else in the room. So again, super grateful for the health, the years that I've been given, the music that I've been allowed to share with fellow musicians and the Valley, right, local community. So this first track or the track that played right now in this intro to this podcast, right, episode number 4, excuse me, is called Blessing. And it's really, truly one of those things that when I was recording the piece, it was the very first piece of this third album called Circles. And when I was writing it, I felt gratitude. I felt like I was extremely blessed to be in this position to even start a third album, having made my dream come true already with the first 2 of original music, right? Leaving some sort of legacy for my kids and personal exploration, right? With creativity that I hadn't, over 15, almost 20 years. So Blessing, that's the title of that track that played at the very beginning of this podcast. Very appropriate and truly what I felt at the time. I felt blessed, felt gratitude, and still do today, right? With album 13 coming out December 1st. Please stay tuned, be ready for that. December 1st this year, 2026. Extremely grateful and happy that that I've gotten this far and consistent, right? Sometimes people would ask, do you feel stressed about recording and trying to do an album a month? And I said, well, it's kind of like a momentum that I realistically can do. Now, do I have to do it? No. Is there a little bit of stress? Maybe at certain times, but it's amazing how quickly I've been able to just create things and let it go and not be hung up on making any single track like the best thing ever. It's like, no, these are ideas that are coming, today or this week, and I'm just laying them down and not trying to be, again, in some sort of fashion, ungrateful for what creativity and skills and whatever I can do at the moment, right? Sometimes we always want to be able to do more. If you want to call that greed, right? We want more money. We want more of this, more of that. And that can include skills, right? Or more out of whatever musical product we're trying to create. And I think at some point, we can only give what we can give. And that includes music. And I really feel that in producing the amount of music that I have, that's kind of reflecting just that, because I haven't had a whole lot of time to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to take a few months or half a year to make this one single album exponentially better than it would have been if I had only spent, a few weeks. So again, that's just my approach. That's just my way of being grateful for the opportunity to record and move forward, right, to the next horizons, musically, hopefully spiritually and emotionally with my family. Super excited about 2026. The podcast has been a recent endeavor, and I hope that those of you that are listening are getting something out of this, right? Gratitude. So that's why I'm calling this podcast number 4, right? Or excuse me, episode number 4, Gratitude, because there's definitely a lot of stories that I can keep going and referring to reinforce that idea that it's definitely something that I have, right? I am definitely grateful and full of gratitude for, again, all the opportunities, all the love and connections, first and foremost for my family, and again, the music relationships and opportunities to perform straight up. If I may highlight a few more moments of gratitude, again, writing original music, recording it, that was probably the first new thing that I'm grateful for. Musically speaking, the second one would be doing, several shows with my original trio called Andromeda Azul Trio. And then thirdly, I have done a couple of wedding, not a couple, I did 2 solo gigs, one of them being a wedding, and then Another one being a local museum gig, right, where I perform solo. And so that is something that is completely new, never been done on a bass with some effects pedals and a looper. And super grateful for the opportunity to explore those desires and uh, those musical opportunities, right? To just improvise, right? Create on the spot, play some originals, and be again very exposed, very transparent in front of people without any sort of band to hide behind or to hey thrive off of, right? Let's face it, sometimes the band is just it's grateful to play anything in a group that's banging, right? That's sounding great, and so yeah, those opportunities. I'm also grateful for the opportunity to still play in church, right? I play at a local church, and it's something that I think really sparked interest in playing music when I was in junior high, right? Playing drums at my church, especially when the drummer would miss out every once in a while or couldn't show up um, promptly due to his job or whatever. He would show up sometimes mid-service, and I got my chance, and church has always been one of those things that has helped me develop an ear and propel my music, right, regardless of what instrument, whether it was drums or bass. That's really where I got the chance to cultivate my early music playing skills, and and again still doing it today, so definitely grateful. um, I got to hear John Legend in concert this past Saturday, as I mentioned before, and he talks about his early church upbringing and singing in gospel choir and everything, and then you hear him perform and hear him sing and play piano, and you're just like, yeah, yeah, we hear you, and we're grateful for again his opportunity to grow up in an environment that encouraged music and also some spiritual growth. So I hope that you're all edified by this podcast. And again, whether it's about the gear or the original music or just some perspectives, that I have over the course of, I'll do the math eventually, how many years I've been playing music. I'm 39, I've been playing since 18, professionally or right before 18. And so just want to be grateful for whatever amount of years, right? It shouldn't be a competition or a numbers game to flaunt. But as long as I keep breathing, I want to be grateful for every opportunity to play music, connect with humans, and hopefully on a positive level. So with that being said, I hope you guys have a great day or night, depending on where you are, and that I will see you in episode number 5. Take care. You have a great one.